Hey everybody, this is Nick from Nick's Listening Space, and today we're going to talk about two affordable speaker stands. Now, the two speaker stands we're going to be talking about today, one is from a company called Pyle, and you can find this speaker stand on Amazon for around $64. Now, the other speaker stand is from Monoprice, which is famously known entry-level speaker stand that you can purchase for sub $100, kind of depending on the size of the stand you purchased. The ones I purchased are the 28-inch high speaker stands. Now, one of the ways that I judge a speaker stand is going to be on kind of three main things. And one is the aesthetic, two is its ability to isolate, and then the third one I think is its ability to adjust or tweak. And really, when you are setting up a listening room, there's kind of a multi-phase period that you go through to set up a speaker. And what do I mean by that? Well, essentially, like, once you figure out the thirds of your room and you get your general placement set, from there it's about listening, tweaking, listening, tweaking. You may find that initial kind of sweet spot relative to your listening position. But then from there, I think it's a matter of, do you toe in your speakers? Do you not toe them in? I think the question really is, what do you get when you get a more expensive speaker stand? So at $64, this guy is about, I think, the cheapest stand you can find on the market. One of the downsides here is that perhaps this isn't the most aesthetically appealing speaker stand. Having said that, I'll go into its functionality and its feature set. And I wanted to do this test justice, so I went ahead and purchased 20 pounds worth of play sand that I put inside the Monoprice stands. And then in addition to that, I purchased these washer and dryer isolation pucks for further isolation. And so the total build out on the Monoprice stands, granted, they're only $84 on Amazon today, but the isolation pucks, I spent $60 on 8 of those. And then the sand that I purchased was about $40 for a 20-pound bag. So in total, the Monoprice stands are sitting at roughly, $180. So there's a big difference in price between these two speaker stands. I think one of the major selling points of these more inexpensive ones from Pyle is the degree at which you can adjust these speakers. There's an incredible amount of adjustability with these. And one of the things that I've really loved about these more affordable speakers is, these guys have a swivel top. And what's really cool about that is it allows you to get the bottom of it placed perfectly. And then from there, you can just simply rotate the top. And so this just provides a great deal of flexibility for kind of that second phase of speaker setup. It's something that over the years I've become incredibly accustomed to, because often I will play with that toe in, just for something different, just to, change up the sound. What we get when we play with the toe in on like my KEF LS50s, for example, is it's the difference between getting a, kind of a studio monitor, close range, near field experience versus getting a more wider sound stage that is more kind of immersive and enveloping. And so over the years, I've really played with that toe in to tweak that experience that I'm getting. One of the other aspects of speaker placement is how far away from the back wall are you placing it? And I'm not going to go too in depth about that, right? But that is really a function of bass control or a parameter of bass control. It allows you, on my speakers, there's a back port. So that's an incredibly important feature, because if I position that closer to that back wall, I'm going to get more bass. If I pull it out into the room, I'm going to get less bass, but I'm also going to get greater clarity in vocals. So there is this balance, or this sweet spot that we're really searching for, where we have a great clarity in vocals and then we still have a great amount of kind of visceral bass. Now, kind of between these two speaker stands, you could kind of say one is a light mass stand and one is a heavy mass stand. Now, the Monoprice stands, I think, are substantially heavier than these. And so what you're going to get there is going to be more absorptive mass, or more mass to absorb sound waves. I was really expecting to come out of this with a completely different experience, or rather, I thought this was going to just be an incredible experience that was going to topple these more affordable stands. And I think the truth is that that's just not true. I think that what we're getting, if we compare the sound between these two guys, is we are getting greater clarity out of the Monoprice speakers. And having said that, we're losing a little bit of that visceral bass, or that bass that kind of telescopes through the stand and then, makes its way into your floor and walls and so on and so forth. When we have a greater isolation like that, our speakers are not interacting with the surfaces of your room as much, or the surfaces of your space are not vibrating out of direct coupling, or the speakers are not coupled to your floor or any other surfaces in the space. And so what that does is it allows you to create a more invisible soundstage, or rather the speakers become invisible. That's the goal, right, that we're going for. We want the speakers to disappear, and we want the sound to just seamlessly come from this kind of big sound stage that's three-dimensional. Now, I think both of these stands are on par, and both of these stands have an ability to create that. I think where it differs, again, is probably in the amount of bass that we're getting. We're just not getting the same amount of visceral bass with the Monoprice stands. And kind of a funny thing about that is, while that visceral bass is not telescoping through surfaces as much as it is on the Pyle speakers, and I think because of that, we're getting a sense of less bass in the soundstage. And so now, after having the Monoprice stands in my system for about 3 weeks, I'm kind of finding myself wanting to have a subwoofer. And I never really felt that quite before. But just lately, with these stands and the greater isolation that they have provided, I have found a greater desire to have more bass. And I think the other thing too is perhaps the mid-range response is a little bit better now too, because it's not being washed out by that visceral bass. And I have to say that this is not a dramatic difference. There is a slight difference, but it's just not dramatic enough for me. One of the things is when you have a budget in this hobby, or you go into this hobby with a budget of, say, $1,000. You're going to pick out a source component, an amplifier, some speakers, whatever, some cables, etc. And you get to the end of that, you've picked out everything, and then you realize, oh, I need to go buy speaker stands. And so you go online and you start searching up speaker stands. And you're going to find that the most affordable speaker stand you're going to be able to get are these, and then up from here, you're going to be spending roughly $200 to $300 or more. And if you're somebody that really wants aesthetics and you want a speaker stand that's going to complement your furniture or your interior design, there's an additional tax for that as well. And so then now we're talking about spending $800 for a speaker stand. And so somebody coming into this hobby, you're going to start off with a budget of $1,000 or $400 or whatever your budget is. And so with that budget, you need to then consider speaker stands, right? And I think the last thing you want to do is go spend, a quarter of your budget on a speaker stand. Now, speaker placement is incredibly important, as I've already mentioned, but it's just one of those psychological things that when we get into this hobby, it just doesn't seem like that's worthwhile. Like, I only have this amount of money. Why am I, it just, so I think it's hard for somebody getting into this hobby to understand the importance of speaker placement and the stands. And so being able to buy an affordable stand that's not going to kill your budget, I think is incredibly important. And then from there, maybe you're 2 speakers down the line and you figured out, oh, I got my end game stand mounts. And then go ahead and invest money in buying a really nice, beautiful stand. But, I think that the adjustability on this more affordable stand is just so incredible for a first-time audiophile or for somebody just getting into this. And it really just gets back to the adjustability factor. This is just so incredibly easy to set up and tweak and get placed right that in so many ways, like you could almost argue you're going to have a better user experience on this because it's going to be easier to set up versus these. With the Monoprice stands, one of the things I did to try to get these things towed in properly or symmetrical is I'm using like a adjustable triangle, or you can use a protractor, or there's some other tools, right? But to get that perfectly symmetrical between your 2 speakers is actually pretty difficult. And so you'll spend an awfully amount of time just getting that dialed in. And as I've already mentioned, like during that second phase setup where you're going to spend like a month playing with toe in and playing with the placement from your back wall and all of that, again, to be able to make that quick on the fly adjustment is so incredibly powerful. In conclusions, I think if you're asking this question of like, do I need speaker stands or will these affordable stands make a difference? The answer is absolutely yes. Like, if you don't have speaker stands or you haven't explored proper placement, I think you owe it to yourself, because you shouldn't go any farther with your system build out until you've mastered the art of placement. And then once you've done that, go from there. The next question is, how much of a difference do you get when you step up, to a Monoprice stand at $185 versus these for $64? And I think the difference is marginal. I think that if you really have a slim budget and you don't mind the aesthetic of these speaker stands, I would recommend going with these to start with. And then maybe after you've explored a couple speakers or whatever your goal is, kind of go into a more permanent solution. So while I do think there might be some improvement in the sound quality with the Monoprice speaker stands, we are also given some trade-offs. And one of those trade-offs is we are given less visceral bass, or bass is not telescoping as much. It's minor, but I think that low-end rumble that I'm getting on the cheaper stands is producing perhaps a little bit more of a foundation. And that base foundation is just so incredibly important. You have to have that foundation for everything else to sit on top of. So if you guys like that review, please hit that thumbs up button down below. Hit the bell notification. You have a couple different options that you can select from. And then please leave a comment down below. Have you guys used these speaker stands? Do you guys have more expensive speaker stands? Do you fill your speaker stands with kitty litter, sand? So yeah, have a good day, guys. Bye-bye. Hey everybody, this is a microphone test. 1, 2, 3. Microphone test in the place to be. I'm in the bathroom, baby. I'm in the bathroom, baby. I wanna be with you. I'm in the bathroom, baby.